My name is Michelle Shasinski. I'm the general manager of the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub. We are located in Billings, Montana. We were officially incorporated in 2019, so we're still a relatively new business here in Montana or here in Billings. And especially for this side of the state, we're really one of the only organizations doing this kind of thing. And so it's really starting to build some momentum in Billings, but it's been really cool to kind of be one of the first organizations to really get this formalized, get kind of a local food systems organization formalized in the central eastern part of the state. Having this whole panel about collaboration, we're a growers cooperative, so collaboration is kind of part and parcel to what we're doing. We currently have 13 member producers, and then we pull from about another 10 other producers depending on the week. So about 23 to 27 producers that we're offering products from. We offer only local products through an online ordering platform, primarily to retail to individual family customers. So folks can go online, place an order from any of these different producers, and then pick it up all on kind of one invoice in one bag here in Billings, or in Red Lodge, and then in the summers in Absaroka. So we're kind of widening those pickup locations as well. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we kind of moved away from, we had just been kind of getting some momentum with some wholesale accounts, but those kind of dropped off. So we just kind of put all our eggs in the direct to consumer basket. And that has been working really well for the last year, but I think we're in a position where we're trying to open up some of those wholesale accounts again. A little bit of our history. So we really were kind of born out of this need to create a more reliable market for small and mid-scale producers in our region. We're really lucky to have a ton of fantastic beef producers, which is a little different than the western part of the state. I think they're a little bit more vegetable dominant. And so it's a year-round product, which is really nice. But so some of these ranchers kind of came together, and we're just trying to think of a way that they could pool their resources, do what they do best and continue ranching, but pool their resources to do some of this marketing and aggregation and distribution portion of that. And so they, along with the Northern Plains Resource Council and their Community Food and Agriculture Coalition, kind of came up with this idea, did a feasibility study, created a business plan for the food hub, and got 10 kind of founding members on board. And from that, the food hub was born, and we were, as I said before, officially incorporated in 2019. So our vision, as it were, is to promote and distribute local agricultural products for the mutual benefit of producers and the community as a whole. So while we were maybe born of this need for producers to pool their resources, I think we're really focused on the benefits that this kind of organization can bring to a community. So keeping Montana dollars kind of circulating within our communities, and really supporting our neighbors who are farmers and ranchers, bringing fresh, healthy, in-season food over a short distance to consumers. So really emphasizing the benefit that it can provide for consumers and producers alike. And like I said before, collaboration is the name of the game. We're cooperative, so we have our members are our producers. They create our board of directors and our membership. And so functioning as a cooperative, not only inspires collaboration between producers, but then also these other organizations like the Northern Plains Resource Council, and kind of moving that mindset of collaboration. I think is really interesting in how it plays out, because like I said before, we do have a lot of beef producers. And so I think with the standard model, you might think that there's actually a lot of competition between these beef producers, but we've found that because this kind of regional food system is so new in Montana, I really do think that there's or in Billings at least, I really do think that there's a huge amount of potential as far as our market size being able to grow. So we really haven't had too many issues as far as like competition of the same products, and just that spirit of collaboration, I think, can really be valuable in that we're working towards this together, rather than competing with one another. And I think it almost creates more momentum and more culture around these local markets to open up. So that has been really interesting to see play out. And then just thinking a little bit more about the challenges that we see. One, working with a ton of different people, it's running a business with a ton of different perspectives always presents its own challenges. But I think the cooperative model really gives us, one, the processes to work through those different perspectives. But it also means that when we make decisions, they're really well thought out decisions. And so I do think that it can be both a challenge and a benefit to have so many individual businesses involved in this one business together. We are still pretty new. And so I think overcoming a lot of the logistical challenges, just the kind of, your standard steady, how do we maintain steady growth within this market without bringing on too many producers or without overstepping what we can as far as our market, which are a lot of just the similar challenges of any small business. But I would say, I was trying to kind of boil down what I see as one of our biggest challenges. And it's really this idea around the balance between creating accessible and competitive prices and balancing that with a fair price for producers and for the hub. And I think that this has really been at the core of a lot of the challenges that we're facing, is that we really want to respect our producers and say, look, you have done the math, you've sat down, you know what your product costs. And the hub has sat down and done the math, and we know what we need to be functional. And then presenting that cost into a system, especially in Billings, where there hasn't been so much of this local food movement, presenting those prices, especially to wholesale accounts, has been a really tough thing to navigate, and getting people to buy into the broader model that we're trying to present, rather than just seeing the dollar number. But then on the not wholesale side of that, creating accessible markets, we want anybody in Billings to be able to purchase our products. And so seeing how we can manage that and not make our products kind of an exclusive product, but make sure that everybody is getting fair prices along the way. Yeah, and that's kind of the big synopsis of what I have. Yeah, I'm excited to answer any questions, and yeah, thank you.
Michelle, thank you very much. That's a great, concise summary. And I want to just take the moment to ask a very specific question while you're in this mode. I think we'll basically delay the questions until later, but I wanted to have you complete one story. You talked about bringing the wholesalers into that decision about fair pricing. And could you talk about a breakthrough or a moment when you saw the light go on and people actually accepted that, or when it became just too difficult to carry on that conversation with a wholesaler?
Yeah, actually had a really interesting, so one of our baker from down in Red Lodge has started selling her bread at the Town and Country, and they were so resistant because it's expensive, it ends up being something like, $10 a loaf on the shelf. And I was talking with the manager there, and he was just amazed that people were buying it. And I was like, well, have you tried it? And he said, no, I haven't tried it yet. But he said he saw somebody come in and they had like a big sale, like $1 a loaf bread on one side, and then they had Samurai Sue's bread on the other side. And the person came in, looked, and got our producer's bread instead. And I think that moment of a lot of people are just resistant to even putting it on the shelf. And then when they do, and when we really lean into the story of it, we say, look, this is from Red Lodge, it's sourdough. You can chat with the woman who made it. You have this like really direct connection to where it's made. And then seeing that actually play out and then being able to sell it, I think was a huge moment. For Town and Country, at least for one account.
Well, that's very helpful. And it's also in a community that has some people with money to spend too, and it may be tougher to do that in Billings and in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, why don't we have Todd fill us in about Farmer's Stand, and then we can just open up to more general questions across both of you. Are you able to do that, Todd?
Yep. Everybody hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, my name is Todd Ulizio. My wife Rebecca and I own Two Bear Farm outside of Whitefish. I just wanted to start maybe hitting on what Michelle had said about the spirit of collaboration. I know as a brand new farmer 14 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the environment that we stepped into. And I want to just recognize up front that when you're a small business or a new farmer, it's really hard to have that collaborative mindset right off the bat because you're just sort of struggling for survival. And I think we tend to have this scarcity mindset of we have this finite pie and we're trying to get our slice of it, right? We're trying to get our market share. So I just want to recognize that it wasn't until probably 7 or 8 years into farming where we had gained some success and some security, where we started to realize that we couldn't do it alone. We were getting a lot of calls from chefs, restaurants, grocery stores. And we were realizing that if we said no, because we didn't have the capacity, we didn't want to lose that customer from the local food system. You know, if our goal was really to grow the local food system, we needed to share those opportunities with others so that somebody could say yes, maybe not our farm. And so that was a big mindset shift for us. The first time we really put that into action, as Robin had mentioned, was we have some friends, Brooke and Sean, who had the Wicked Good Farm. It was a very small farm and they wanted to start farming full time. So they came to us and asked like, hey, if we quadrupled the size of our farm and just brought all that food to farmers market, what would you think? And my response was, I think the farmers markets are pretty saturated. That seems like a high risk approach. Why not find a part of the food system that has more opportunity or is maybe underserved? And so we talked it through, and for us, it was that chef component of chefs don't want to deal with 20 different farms and making all these different calls and the logistics of that. I said it'd be super great if we had like a local food distribution company that could handle it. And we came up with this plan where Brooke and Sean would start this company. They would sell all of the food from their farm first, but they were a small farm. And then as their accounts grew and they needed more food, other farms in the valley would chip in, but they would handle the logistics for us. And it was really a win-win in the fact that suddenly we were focused on production, and that's where we wanted to be focused. They could focus on the logistics, the sales, the online marketplace, the distribution. And so we tried that out. I believe they're going on year 6 now, and every year they've doubled their sales. And so that's proven to be like a really great model from a wholesale standpoint, and they buy from, I don't know the exact number, but I would say over a dozen different farms just in our valley. And so we started to think about how great that collaboration worked on a wholesale standpoint. So Rebecca and I were sitting down one day and we're thinking about our farm from a retail standpoint. We primarily had focused on CSA shares and farmers markets. But going into our 14th year, there's a lot of logistical issues involved with that direct to consumer approach. And 3 of them really stood out to us. The first one was from a customer standpoint. CSA shares and farmers markets are not convenient. For many people, it's a 2.5-hour window, 1 day a week, where they can get access to food. If it's a market, or maybe it's a CSA pickup that's 2 hours on a given day. Just due to people's schedules, the limited availability of those outlets just prevents a lot of people from engaging in the local food system. So the thought was, how do we make this more accessible? Consumers are definitely interested in ease and convenience. So how do we kind of meet them where they are? So that was our first thought. The second was that doing 3 farmers markets a week, every week for 20 weeks, plus 5 CSA drop-offs a week, when you have a total crew of 8 on a farm, is a logistical nightmare that I don't think a lot of people realize the amount of work and effort that goes into schlepping your food all over the place. And so again, we were like, is there a better way to keep the direct consumer kind of feel to it, but be able to focus our energies in like one place to make it a little bit more sustainable for us? Because as we get older, that idea of doing all of that every year after year, we definitely see it as a red flag. So we wanted to address that. And then the third point that we were thinking about, we were at the Eco Farm meetings a few years back, and I was in a session with, he was the director of the Sonoma Food Hub, and he had this great quote that he opened with, and Michelle kind of hit on it, which is, everybody wants fair prices for farmers, they want high quality local organic food, and they want affordable prices for consumers. You can have any 2 of the 3. Right? And everybody in the room paused for a little bit and they thought about it, and then they all started to shake their heads. Like, yes, like, how do you crack that nut? How do you make that equation work? One thing that we had seen in our community, which was a bit of frustration, is the way a lot of restaurants and markets deal with that difficult equation is the prices paid to farmers aren't always the best. And then that high quality local organic food component, we were seeing a lot of greenwashing start to creep in, where people were implying or suggesting that that's what they were providing, when the reality was they were going with the inexpensive sort of industrial food system. And so what I don't think that the restaurants understood is, by greenwashing, they were in turn undermining the production of local food. Because if people thought they were already getting it through restaurants, they weren't seeking out that production from farms directly. So there was some frustration involved in there that we didn't know how to address. So to the point of the talk, given how well our partnership with Brooke and Sean had gone on the wholesale end, we all decided, what if we did a retail market in town, not downtown where it was super busy, but like a half a mile outside of Whitefish, in a space that had plenty of parking, had normal business hours, just like a grocery store. We would be 100% farmer owned, so we would know and understand the supply chain. We would be the supply chain. we're going to combine our efforts. Given Brooke and Sean were already running a truck around the valley to different farms twice a week, it made sense that they could then haul back produce from these farms to the retail store. Our goal was to do everything as close to home as possible, and then sort of supporting local farms and the values that were important to us, but not defining it just as local, moving out in concentric rings. Like this time of year, we're purchasing from small farms just like us in Oregon and Washington, because produce production in the Flathead is kind of tailed off at this point. And so being farmers, we tend to be, for better or for worse, very action oriented. We also tend to be very impatient. And so we just decided we were going to go for it. And I have some pictures. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you see that, Robin? Is that popping up? Oh, hold on. Here we go.
Perfect.
Okay. So in January of this year, we had been looking at a different property. It fell through. In January of this year, Brooke and Sean came to Rebecca and I and said, we found this spot right outside of Whitefish. It's actually in the Mountain Mall, which is a very small mall, but the store had an exterior door to it. It used to be the Little Caesars Pizza. And we were like, it's pretty gross, as you can see from that picture. It was just this white, barren space. But we were thinking, what better than to replace fast food with slow food? Like, this was just a challenge. And, it's January, so what else are farmers going to do but take on a new project? So this is where we started. We got the keys to the building. By the time we worked out the lease, March 1st, we got the keys to the building. We decided we were going to open June 2nd. So we had 3 months to go from this to that. So this is our first day that we opened. That's Katie there, our first employee. The goal of the store was to be very vegetable forward, supporting local farms, but basically any Montana producer. So we have meat and dairy. Everything in the store is grown without agricultural chemicals. Whether it's certified organic or we just vet it for that. That was a big thing that our community was telling us, is that we want access to food that's healthy, that we know what the ingredients are, that there aren't questionable ingredients, and really a push to get ag chemicals out of the food supply. We have a kitchen in the back, so we do grab and go meals that are made from scratch every day using 100% organic ingredients, most of them local, everything down to the spreads on the sandwiches. And so like the ham sandwich, for instance, uses Lifeline biodynamic ham in it. The bread is all baked locally by another restaurant using 100% organic Montana wheat. So we're really trying to walk the walk here. The idea was, if we're the farmers and we're the middlemen, we now control two of the variables in that very challenging equation. And can we tweak that to, at the end, provide affordable prices? And that's been a huge challenge, as Michelle hit on. But a lot of it is also challenging our assumptions of what are people willing to pay for good food. Because most grocery stores make that decision for us. They say, well, that's too expensive. We're not going to put it on the shelf. We're not going to give the consumer the option. And so that was sort of the status quo that we were trying to challenge with this, what I would call big experiment. That's sort of a view of it from the outside. The name has a bit of a double meaning. That was probably the hardest thing we did, was come up with the name. We knew the initial meaning was that people would think of a farmer stand at the market. So they visualize lots of produce But I had also mentioned there is a lot of frustration in there in dealing with all of the headwinds that we face with an industrialized chemical food system, subsidized food, the recent allowance by the USDA to let hydroponics into the organic program. It was kind of a lot of frustration welling up. And so we as farmers, small farmers, wanted to take a stand to kind of put a line in the sand. And so the store kind of has that store name has that double meaning to it. This is opening day. One thing we always wanted to see was like big, bountiful farmers market style produce. This picture, all of this came from Two Bear Farm, fresh picked the day before. So the quality and the nutrition is really high. That's half of the produce cooler. This is sort of the other half. A lot of this food came in from just local farms in Western Montana. A lot of it through Western Montana Growers Cooperative. So that was kind of a big emphasis of ours. The other thing is, you hear over and over again that consumers don't want to hear the bad news. They don't want the negative statistics. It doesn't lead to positive outcomes. And so how do we give consumers a positive story to bring them into the local food system? And so the motto of our store became, your food has a story. And we really put a lot of effort into, you can see in this photo, a lot of advertising within the store, showing where the food's coming from, putting a face to the food, these little QR codes everywhere where people can scan that with their phone and it'll take them to the producer's website so that they can learn more. So really trying to put a positive spin on it. And then hopefully that leads to people thinking about, if they know the story of our food, maybe that will lead them to think about the story of all the other food that they're buying. And maybe that makes a light bulb go off. Quick picture, it's gotten bigger than that now, but that's sort of the grab and go section. A lot of it is it's all made fresh daily, fresh salads, fresh sandwiches. It's a way for us to use a lot of produce, not to say seconds, but produce that maybe isn't good enough for the retail cooler. We can then add value to it and turn it into a potato salad or a hummus. Again, all local ingredients. So that's just kind of a summary of that. I guess I would say to conclude on the farmer stand is we've been kind of shocked at the community outpouring of support. People love that store. Just to put a couple numbers out there. So we've been open for 5 months now. In that 5 months, we've sold $188,000 just of Montana produce. We've sold $94,000 worth of organic salads and sandwiches. So it's really, and that is in addition to the farmers markets and the CSA program. So it's not that took sales from elsewhere. I would say that is new sales to new people in the community. So that's like a net positive influx of healthy food into our community. So it really seems to be working. I know that was kind of a long intro, so I'm not going to dive into challenges and things like that. I'm going to turn it back to Ken, I guess, and he can dictate where we go from here.
Okay, I probably try not to be a dictator here, but thank you for that's actually a really inspiring story. It's really wonderful to see the photographs and how much transformation you're able to make, and those are really good sales numbers to have. So, as I'm thinking about these two stories, first of all, just let me say, if you have questions, anybody on the call, please put them in the chat, and I'll pick up anyone that I can. But to get us rolling, I think it struck me as both of you were talking that to make this work takes the building. I mean, I talk a lot about in the book because Montana is such a collaborative place compared to most states I work in, where people are really pretty good at letting their guard down and being honest with each other and cooperating. And it's always been great to kind of see how well that happens in Montana over time. And I think to make this work, you need farmers and buyers, the wholesale buyers and the consumers and policymakers, which means civic leaders, to all sort of get this whole idea of doing food in a very different way. Maybe actually resolving the triangle that you mentioned, Todd, and basically being able to provide all three because people are willing to pay more and people appreciate the quality. So it strikes me that Michelle's work really focused more on the conversation with the wholesale buyers, and Todd, your story focuses more on bringing consumers into the store and bringing them in a conversation about, well, what do you want? And that's preference people have for having organic produce. And I'm wondering to sort of how we broaden that conversation in the richest possible way to make sure that all four of those entities and others are also involved in the collaboration. Do you have any thoughts on that, either one? Michelle, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are consistently weighing those different things. I think maybe the wholesale came out a little bit more, just because we are in this mode where we're trying to move back into that wholesale realm. It is super interesting to hear the differences in our communities. I think Billings has always been a little bit of a tough nut to crack. I don't know exactly, what the dynamics are there, and certainly we've seen a ton of support from our community. We're selling about 150. We get about 100 to 120 orders a week, and have a lot more folks kind of signed up on our site. So we really do depend on those orders as well. So yeah, I didn't mean to overemphasize the wholesale part of it because it's just kind of the direction we're moving. But as far as broadening that conversation, I think it's incredibly important to have that community buy-in and even that culture around purchasing local food. And it's been really interesting to see kind of the different rhetoric around it. As far as like in Whitefish, Todd, you're in Whitefish, right? Or that's where the store is? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and here, using language around neighborhood ranchers, the core of Montana has been agricultural, like we want to, support Montana agriculture. We want to keep our economy booming, as in we want to keep those dollars circulating within our community. And that has really been the language that I think has been most beneficial. Which is, yeah, sorry, I'm kind of a stream of consciousness, but which is kind of hard to overlap with this idea of encouraging people that it's worth it to pay a little bit more for your food. And so, to be honest, I'm not sure how a retail store would do. We're thinking about opening a small retail space here just for kind of the basics. And Todd, like you were talking about the ease and convenience of opening up a couple different days for people to come and get products. So I'll be really interested to see how that goes. And I'm so glad that you guys had such success with it, but I would be really interested to see, how behind it we get, how much people will get behind this kind of retail portion of it.
I did a speaking tour to Billings and Red Lodge a number of years ago. It was a long time ago now, and the conversation in Billings was quite austere at that time, but there was a lot of initial enthusiasm, and it was much more advanced in Red Lodge, but they also didn't have the sort of the same capacity to move. So I think combining those two markets is a really good step, and it's exciting for me to see how much progress you've made since I was out on that tour. Todd, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, I would say for starters, I know Whitefish is sort of a wealthy resort type town, but in the valley, we also have Columbia Falls and Kalispell, which are definitely, I mean, they're all changing rapidly the last couple of years, but definitely more of a blue collar kind of demographic. And it's been interesting to see that the demand for our food spans all those demographics, that we're not just a sort of an exclusive store. And that holds for farmers markets as well. Our farmers market sales are actually highest in Kalispell as opposed to Whitefish, which always kind of surprised us. I think what's working in our favor is that I think a lot of people have a disconnect. Maybe they have a nostalgic idea of where food comes from. And as they see more and more how much that has changed, how food production has become so industrialized over the last 75 years, whether it's the COVID pandemic and the supply chains that bring that to light, when they start to hear the numbers, that the negative numbers that I said I wouldn't talk about, but the chronic illness rates in this country going from 5% of adults in 1950 to 60% of adults today, they're seeing the issues. It's just connecting the dots from those issues back to the food system. And so when people, the biggest challenge we have is people have been conditioned to think about cheap food. And then having that conversation of, is it really cheap? What is the true cost of cheap food? That hits on like the subsidy side of things. It also hits on the fact that healthcare costs, any savings that we've had in the past 75 years on food, we used to spend 25% of our per capita income on food. We now spend 6% of our per capita income on food. But healthcare is the exact opposite. It's gone from 6% of our earnings to 25%. So there's no net savings. We're just eating worse and feeling worse. So I think as people recognize that, you hope, I don't know, we as farmers can't educate the world on that, but I think the information's out there, and I think people are catching on. At the end of the day, the big challenge is how do we make good, healthy, nutritious food accessible to everyone and be fair, like I mentioned before. How do we do it where it's a fair price to the producers, right? A lot of that's education. A lot of that's bigger from a policy standpoint. Why does the US government subsidize the production of chemical commodities, but then make organic growers pay to be certified organic? How do we shift the subsidy structure so that it's a level playing field? We like to think America is a capitalistic free market, but it is not a free market, right? There are lots of policy and regulatory biases in there.
I want to cut this off. We have a lot of questions building up in the chat room. I'd like to kind of get to those, but
Okay.
One very quick one is whether both of your projects are SNAP certified for doing allowing first of all food stamp access, but also EBT.
We are.
Both of you?
No, we are not yet. Yeah, it's been on it's tough with the online platform. I think we'll probably do it in the next year, I would imagine. And especially if we have a retail space, it's a lot easier to do it in a face-to-face setting, but just a little bit more complicated
I wanted to mention
in an
that.
online platform.
I think there are ways to do it though. So, we'll have to explore those. And I just wanted to mention that question came from Tammy Howard. And the other question that was fairly quick was, somebody asked Arrow asked if you have data on how people come to shop at the farmer stand. How far are people coming from their homes to shop there?
I don't know the answer to that. I think we pull from, I would say maybe 15-mile area. I don't know that it's beyond that. For the most part, there are other health food stores in the south end of the valley. I also wanted to add back to the SNAP question. That's one place where collaboration has worked for us in that there's a nonprofit called Farm Hands Nourish the Flathead, which is the one that facilitated that. And we now have SNAP benefits at all our farmers markets as well as at the farmer stand. And so that's a great place where partnership made that possible.
Okay, great. Another question from Ann Little to Michelle. How is the meat that you sell being processed? Is that, do you have control of that aspect of the production, or is that, how does that happen?
Yeah, so that is the producers are getting it processed, and they are going to pretty much any place they can. It's been a really interesting year. I think it's starting to get to be less of a problem, but people are having to get processing dates, you know, a year out, and reserving those dates really early on. I get the picture that it's getting a little bit better. I think there's also been some recognition that we need more regional processing plants. So maybe even more people getting some of that going. I think it'll be a long time before we see that come to action. And it's a very hard balance because you want to make sure you have the producers there who are going to utilize the service, and you have the before you actually invest in creating it. But I think the pandemic in particular demonstrated that could totally happen, and will actually be more resilient if we have those structures in place. And so they're using either state inspected or federally inspected. If it's something that's going to go to a grocery store, they usually want it to be federally inspected. But since we're not selling across state lines in general, then we do allow for just state inspected facilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question from Shauna Eagleton is, how are each of you integrating or not with local grocery stores? Are you sort of coming to them and saying, we're going to compete with you? Or are you saying, can we find some ways of collaborating? And I think one person, she also wanted to ask, especially around low-income buyers, how do you make this more accessible to people who have limited means? So maybe Michelle, we'll start with you and then go to Todd.
Yeah, so we've like I said, been trying to reach out to some more grocery stores and get our things into grocery stores. They have very different standards. So like I said, you know, everything needs to be federally inspected as far as the meat goes, in pretty like nice packaging. You know, it's got to look nice to put on the shelf. So I think we're starting to learn what those what those quality standards that they would like, and then also figuring out our supply end as far as vegetables in the summer. You know, it's a lot of back and forth calls between the grocery store and when they want it, and the demand side. So we absolutely, I think that it's a great avenue for us, and I think we'll definitely continue to explore it and start to make it work. But the grocery store itself really does need to have some sort of investment in local agriculture, because it isn't the same as just ordering from some of the other distributors. It's a pretty different process that they need to be bought into, otherwise it's not going to work.
My experience has been that unless the store is really locally owned and independent of a major chain, it really doesn't last very long. And even then, it may not last long. But those are the firms that have the most likelihood of just saying, we're going to commit to our neighbors, because they have the power to make that decision. And once you get into a national chain, you might get a good person for a couple of years, but they often get promoted to a better job, or they move out because they're not getting far enough with their work. And those conversations tend to be much more convoluted, I think. And some stores do really, really well, but it's kind of, I find it kind of episodic.
And very person dependent. And similar with restaurants, you get a chef who's really excited about local food, but then if they move on to another, you know, so it's trying to find markets that are going to be sustainable for our producers, as in long-term, reliable, year to year.
Okay, Todd.
I think for the reasons you just said, we, instead of trying to change how a grocery store works or try to always find the right people, the point of the farmer stand was to just provide an alternative where we could control that and do it ourselves. And I think we're very different from a grocery store in that we are values based. I mean, everything we buy in has to meet certain criteria that is not profit motivated. So that's a big difference. We also have control of the margins. And so while our prices may be higher, what we're selling, I guess we would say what we're selling is very different from what they're selling. You know, where their head of broccoli and our head of broccoli, I don't think is comparable per se in terms of freshness and how it was grown. And so it's an alternative. We've definitely have held our margins actually below what a normal grocery store would be. So even though we're paying a farmer a higher price, we're lowering the margins of the store. Again, back to that equation idea of how do we end up getting a reasonable price to the consumer.
Great. Let's see. The another really interesting question is, well, Shannon Mascari asked that Todd, I think, basically, and we may not be able to get into this right now, but she just asked what the source of your numbers were about healthcare costs and food costs and so on. And that's data that I found somewhere, but you may have a source that you may want to put in the chat about where those numbers come from. You can also talk to Shannon later about how to have that conversation. Another question came from Allie Moxley for Todd. Just what is the waste stream from the storefront like? How do you handle the waste, and what's your plan for making it less, for reducing that over time?
So far, the sales have been brisk enough that there hasn't been a lot of waste. Actually, the vast majority of waste we sell lots of different products, groceries, but from a produce standpoint, most of the waste is actually low quality food that's coming in from, and that's been a challenge for us, is how do we maintain the quality that we have on our farm when we're buying from other farms. And so if we're getting in produce that's not high enough quality to put on the shelf, we can use it in the kitchen. If we don't use it in the kitchen, we compost all that waste through dirt rich compost. And then we, as a farm, Two Bear Farm buys that compost back in the spring to use on the farm. So in that way, we've kind of closed the loop. The grab and go, anything that expires there, I bring home to the farm crew and they devour it. So that's a really good closed loop way to deal with that. And then everything else is really shelf stable. So I don't think that we're producing a lot of waste at this point in time.
Okay, great. Richard Donovan asked, can you talk about the need for cold food storage in the region? And I assume that might be two levels. One is, some food co-ops have had a place for individuals to rent a cooler so they can store food between shopping, and others, there's also a need for cooling at a wholesale level too. But on both levels, what sort of needs do you see in the region, in Whitefish region, first of all, Flathead?
I should have put a picture of our walk-in cooler on the slideshow. That would have really, it's a chronic issue. One benefit from a collaborative point is that Two Bear Farm has a lot of cooler space in the fall. Mm-hmm. And our food bank recently did a big upgrade on cooler space. So there's a way that we can leverage that. If we have a lot of produce we need to move through the store, our farm can hold it. I think where it's a bigger challenge is from the customer standpoint. Root cellars used to be a common thing in houses. They no longer exist. I think that's the benefit of a store. When we did CSA, when the season ended, we dump all these vegetables on people and say, take them home. Here's your 50 pounds of carrots. They didn't know what to do with that because they didn't have a locker, a cold locker they could rent. They didn't have an extra fridge. They don't have a root cellar. So the benefit of the store now is that we do that for them, right? We hold the carrots at the farm. We feed them through the store on a daily basis. And it maybe, I hope, alleviates that bottleneck.
Okay. Michelle, do you have anything to say for the buildings area?
I mean, yeah, similarly, I think we are actually in the process of getting some bigger freezer and cooler capacity. And it's as you grow, and as you grow in that volume, you recognize that you're gonna have to hold stuff. And how do you do that? We do a lot of meat as well. And so having sufficient freezer space, but there's also some local rentable, they have a warehouse sized freezer that a lot of our producers use to rent out space after they process animals.
Okay, good. I know I talked with Seven Sons Farm in Indiana. They've done a marvelous job of doing direct sales to household delivery in Indiana. And when I interviewed them, they said, whenever we bought freezer space, it paid for itself so fast. We just put up as much as we could afford, and it always paid for itself. And they had the money to do that. Not everybody does have that option too. Okay, I noticed that there are a lot of people on the call who have not been asking questions, who are economic developers or working in some kind of development capacity. I'm wondering if both of you could kind of talk about what role an economic developer or a sympathetic nonprofit could play in helping foster, the strength of your businesses. Robin asked about the sustainability of each of your businesses, but also part of that is kind of what construct we build, what collaborations we build. And I'm wondering how, what role can others play, economic developers play, or scholars play, or whatever, to kind of make this work better over time. Michelle, do you want to get started?
Sure, yeah. It's a funny thing because I think the Northern Plains Resource Council, obviously they have been huge in helping us structure our fundraising efforts, but I do feel, I've mainly been involved in this sector in Montana, so I don't know how different it is in other states, but I feel like I have an incredible amount of resources at my disposal in Montana, which is really fantastic, and I think might not be the case in other states. As far as resources for cooperative development, business development, and Northern Plains helping us with, they are expert fundraisers. And so how do we fundraise? How do we do these different things? And the funny part is that, gosh, those things all take time. And so I feel like there are so many resources out there. But I decided to do kind of like a food ag business tour over the next week. So I'm going to go and visit with some other food hubs, visit with Mission West. And I think that we just had a call with a food hub down in Colorado yesterday that was incredibly helpful. And so I think continuing to recognize that there's a ton of resources. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that there are people here in Montana whose job it is to assist with the kind of small business issues that we're running into, and then finding the time to utilize those resources because it's worth it.
Okay, great, very helpful. And Todd, do you sense the need for some additional support from say economic developers or so on, or have you had that?
Yeah, I don't know that I've had it. I know I've been talking to Robin a lot lately about my sense of frustration from the grant standpoint, state and federal agencies, especially COVID money. A lot of it has been commodity focused and scale focused. And so I've been struggling a lot with how do we change the language away from commodities and exports and more towards food and nutrition and small scale. So I think there's a ton of room. I'm sure there's resources out there. We need more help. I'm still working on identifying who that is. As you both mentioned, it seems like you need people to champion the cause, whether they're economic developers or nonprofits, or even for a while, Montana Food Corps had such a strong role and things were happening and it was so great. And then as soon as a couple of people moved on, that just sort of fizzled and disappeared. And so how do we get consistent support? I think, is a big question. Like, how do we maintain momentum in the face of people coming and going?
Okay. And again, I think, my sense of that is it's really about building that broader culture where the whole community starts to embrace the mission that you're on. And it's a little plug from my book. There's a really good story from AceNet in Southeast Ohio, how they basically started with a concept of starting worker-owned businesses that were food related. And then that moved into helping do business startups to help people do food incubators. And over time, they were able to get the Chamber of Commerce and get the local officials and local agency heads to really carry on that work that they had started as a small core of people, but it became integrated in the daily life of the community. And that's a pretty inspiring story of how people built that culture over time. Robin asked if what are the main challenges to sustainability for your businesses? So Todd, would you like to start with that? What would be the main one that you see?
Depends on what kind of sustainability, personal or financial or environmental.
Of the business.
I would say supply. There's no way that, given the way it's going, that our supply can keep up with our demand. And as farmers, that's a little nerve-wracking because that's putting more pressure on us to do more. And that's what we want to just have a sweet spot where we can have a sustainable quality of life and not always be having to do more. So is it okay in today's world to have a small business that stays a small business and doesn't just grow and grow and grow until it fails? That is an idea that challenges the status quo, but I do think we are terrible at putting boundaries on things to keep them sustainable. So I think our goal is to keep it small, to not sacrifice our values in order to simply chase growth, which is not going to be popular with consumers per se. But the goal would be like, why not have a store like this in every community? And I don't want to own it. I don't want to be a franchise person, right? Like maybe this idea will grow and spread, and then every community can have a store like this. And it can be custom tailored to the producers in that area.
I worked with a banker named Dean Harrington. He's passed away now, unfortunately, but he was in a small community of 3,000 people in Southeast Minnesota. And he was fourth generation banker. He turned over the bank to his daughter, who's now fifth generation managing the bank. And he had this whole concept of developing steady state businesses in small towns, which were large enough to suit the market nearby, and did not try to get larger than that, but just tried to maintain a very steady foundation for local trade. And that was a very difficult concept for him to get other bankers to embrace. But it was a really pretty profound way to think about that. And that's, again, part of the culture of this is the culture of collaboration, is understanding that it's not all about individual success. It's not all about the most prominent individual firm that succeeds. It's really about the community succeeding better. And we don't have very good tools for that in this country to have that conversation right now.
Yeah, I told Robin the other day that the more grants I get denied for, the more I know I'm on the right track.
There you go. Michelle, do you have any specific challenges that you'd like to address?
I mean, no, I think I just mirror what you all are talking about, and it is a really interesting, I think, working as a regional cooperative, it is touching on that same thing of that we actually don't want to get incredibly big. Like, that is not the point. And also, you know, that our profits are going to go back as dividends to our cooperative members. So I think seeking new structures, to create kind of a different business culture, maybe. But as far as sustainability, I think making sure that those are built on really strong foundations, so that you can take that time rather than just trying to get bigger and continuing to grow. If you can create a really solid foundation and then dig into those values, dig into that community aspect, dig into that connection, as kind of your next step of growth rather than getting bigger. And it's great because then we can collaborate more. We have less of this competitive mindset as far as like the Western Montana Growers Co-op in the western part of the state. We aren't competing against them because we are really trying to fill these different niches. And I just see that as a really lovely future of Montana agriculture. And sustainable. I think in the long run, more sustainable.
Yeah, great. I've been having some conversations with people who I don't think they have that much money, but they think they're financiers and they're trying to find the right investment to make. And it's been sort of comical because I told them about one experience I'd had, and they said, well, how do we take that to scale? And I hadn't even said I wanted to go to scale. They just were so committed to going to scale. They asked that question before anything else. And I think that this whole notion of really staying small, staying rooted in a community and building more of a culture of survival and a culture of resilience is very foreign ground for them because they've been spending their time making money. And so we're going to have, I think, increasing conflicts with those voices in the next few years because we're now getting a ton of people realizing the food system's screwed up and they want to make a difference and they want to solve climate change in 5 years. And they're really sort of starting with very primitive conceptual tools, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of enjoyable to have these discussions with people, and it's just that it's pointing out that are we asking the right questions, and then rephrasing it like, what if we ask this question instead, and what are our goals what are the goals of the food system? What are the goals of a medical system?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
definitely rich for debate.
Great. I mean, is that part of the outreach that the store does to the community in terms of, is that more one-on-one as people come in the store? Do you have sort of outreach campaigns based on that?
I feel like as a farmer, we're so busy, we're terrible advocates. It's like we need cloned farmers who can do education and outreach. The store has improved upon that a little bit because now we have staff that's there full time and they have the bandwidth. We need more outreach and education, but that's been a real conundrum for me. It's like, I don't have the time to do it, but somebody somewhere must. So that's like a resource I need to tap into.
Okay, well, it may be a cost of doing business to have someone doing outreach. That's not something it pays for. You can't pay that by selling produce, but you can raise some grants or get some support from whatever source to make sure that
right
happens.
Or maybe that's where a nonprofit comes in that has secure funding because they're nonprofits by nature are educational, right? So what a great partnership.
Good. Ann Little asked if each of you is keeping records that could be a template to help someone start a similar store in another town or some similar food hub. I mean, there's obviously a national network of food hubs that share information pretty readily, but in terms of the store you have, I worked with a store in central Illinois in Mount Pulaski, which is a very similar story of a group of people just taking an old storefront and converting it into a grocery store. There was a cooperatively owned grocery store in the middle of the pandemic when people weren't going to stores. They decided to start a new business because they had access to a building and they had about 5 farmers that could supply it, and that's now flourished into a food processing center that they're trying to open. So are there stories that, Todd, or have you kept records that would allow someone to kind of understand how to think about doing something in their own community?
Yeah, we definitely have all the records, and we could certainly just talk to people about it. I did in the comments, I put the farm email in there because I can't keep up with all the comments and the questions, but people are free to email me after this session. Mm-hmm. I could give a better answer.
Great. I'll leave it at that. Robin also asked Todd, has having the store impacted the Two Bears approach to its fall stock up sale day? How does that affected your farm?
There's been a net increase. We grew the pie, I guess I would say. The stock up sale, for those who don't know it, at the end of the season every year, with all of our storage crops, we invite the community out to the farm. We started that because the annual harvest market through our town farmers market got canceled one year, and it kind of left us hanging. So again, we decided, hey, we'll just do it ourselves. The community response kind of blew our minds. We get about 800 people who come out to the farm in a course of 3 hours. This year, with the store being open, we had the highest sales ever at the stock up sale, and it didn't seem to affect the store. So I would say that we grew, right? It was a net increase. We grew the local food system.
And it sounds like what happened is it wasn't really a matter of outreach as much as just your presence and kind of your involvement in the store, and the discussion helped people take the idea of buying from local farms more seriously.
Yeah, and I don't know the numbers, but the Flathead Valley has 100, maybe it's now 130,000 after the pandemic, but it's a number somewhere in there. I don't know what proportion of people buy local food from farms, but it's tiny. I bet it's, of all the food consumed in the valley, it's a small portion is local. So I think there are plenty of customers to tap into. And maybe the store, just by being more convenient, just tapped into a different group of people, attracting new people to local food.
And I suspect the pandemic is playing a role as well, because I know people, maybe thought the pandemic was over and now realizing that they're still going to be working with it for a while, and they're paying more attention to where food comes from and stocking up more and so on.
And the role of nutrition. If you look at the statistics of, the role of chronic illness and the effects of COVID, I think people are starting to put more emphasis on eating healthier. At least some people are. Mm-hmm. So I think that's helps.
Richard Donovan asked a very thoughtful question. I just delayed it because I wanted to make sure we got to some of the more nuts and bolts questions first. But he's really asking how farmers in your area, and Todd, you don't have to speak for all farmers, but I mean, in terms of in both Billings and in the Whitefish area, how are people addressing the issue of water shortages and also the issue of climate change and carbon? There's a lot of investors I'm talking to now are saying, well, we can't solve agriculture until we have carbon taxing or we have carbon set asides or whatever. Obviously, the water shortage has been quite drastic in Arizona, and we're having trouble even addressing that issue. Let me go start with Michelle, but how is that discussion kind of playing out in Billings?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. We had a lot of wildfires and an incredibly dry summer. I think we do have a couple of producers who are really kind of leading the way in kind of regenerative agriculture and reinvesting in soils. Charter beef and livestock, I think, has been a pretty well-known example throughout the state. They're doing a lot of vermiculture as well, and really thinking about soils and how we can use them as resiliency to climate change and to these different issues. Investment in kind of diversity of seeds, heirloom seeds, what kind of seed saving practices can we have within our area? We have a couple of different producers, really, they always are testing out different varieties throughout the year. And I think that that's or throughout the years. And I think that that's a way to really figure out what's going to work as our climate changes. It is another one of those pieces that I think we have a huge variety of producers with a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different practices, and we really emphasize transparency within our organization rather than requiring anybody to be certified organic, or really even requiring specific practices where our goal is to support local and to support producers, and to support transparency. So I think leaning into that conversation however we can, and we do get a really interesting, diverse number of answers to how people are going about having different sustainable practices, which is great because we have a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of practices. And I think that that'll be necessary as things change year to year.
Okay. Todd, how are you addressing issues of climate change or water shortages there?
I think the big push now is regenerative agriculture for the reasons Michelle said. For instance, what 1% of, if you can increase your soil organic matter by 1%, your soil will hold 60,000 more gallons of water when it rains. And so improving our soils to hold water rather than shed them off into the rivers. So I think we need to rethink. I think we already know the answers with regenerative agriculture. It's just how do we get everybody to go that way? I am highly skeptical that Wall Street and investment banks getting involved in carbon trading and water and farmland is going to lead somewhere positive for all the reasons it hasn't helped with the food system and the medical care system. So I don't have the answer. I mean, people need to do things for the right reasons. But I don't know. I guess any discussion around regenerative practices is better than no discussion, you know, even if it's being led by Cargill and Bayer. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
I started using the word regenerative in 1974, I think, when Robert Rodale started using the term, and people thought I was absolutely nuts, you know, and I just dropped it because you couldn't really talk about regeneration. And now it's become such a buzzword that, you know, one of my partners talks about it being sort of such a vague term that it's meaningless, and we've been having conversations about how do we make that better. And I think the one thing I'd say is it's, you know, there's no solution to agriculture without a food system in place that really supports agriculture. So we have to talk about regenerative food systems, not simply regenerative farms. And that's a conversation a lot of people are not ready to have right now. But I think it's also pretty critical to do that. And I think the other thing is, you know, to go back to some of the wisdom that came out of Montana in the first place, as my book documents, really you know, Montana was the first to really say we're building community-based food systems, not local food systems. And that basis in community building and building a culture of collaboration and building, and that's one of the reasons I think, you know, you have to combat greenwashing, and also how we deal with some of the foods from further away than we'd like, but it's the best we can get to build community where we are today. And we're not counting food miles as much as counting how strong we make the community where we live, and how do we celebrate some of these group successes rather than simply talk about who made the most money and left town.
And I think a big challenge for us is a lot of people engage in the food system they think we need to increase the demand for it, which we do, but we can't just increase demand if we don't pay attention to the supply side. Probably not as big a deal in the beef and grain world, but when it comes to like the fruit and vegetable world, there needs to be more farmers. And so really trying to focus, not overemphasizing demand if we don't work on the supply side as well.
Okay. The one final quick question, then I'll turn it back over to Robin and Arrow, but Shauna Eagleton asked if you find the food hub or the store a place where growers and growers gather together. Do they communicate better with each other because of your presence there? Do you promote collaboration?
I think really we established that when we worked with Brooke and Sean with Wicked Good Produce, because immediately we were all talking to each other. We were doing crop planning. We were looking at where opportunities were, because we knew together we could better serve the wholesale world. And that is just fed into the store. Definitely with the store, we have a much broader reach. We're dealing with producers all around Montana, but you know, we're talking to them as individuals and they're seeing what we're doing. We're having discussions. So I really do think we don't pay attention to it enough, but we are, I think, building community around that store.
But do the growers actually get to talk with each other by coming into your store, or do you have a meeting where the growers get together and compare notes on their own?
I think every year we get together in one way or another. I know Wicked Good definitely does an annual synopsis, and we all talk. I think where it's more important is not just in the Flathead, but kind of expanding that community involvement and discussion to the growers maybe outside our valley, you know, bringing more people in. There's work to be done there.
Okay.
But it's transparent and it's open, so.
Okay, good. And Michelle, I'll just let you have the final word on that question, then I'll turn it back to Robin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the downsides of being a very new hub is that our producers put so much time into the hub. But the good part of that is that they are driving their stuff here every week, and they're coming together and they're chatting, and our meat producers are saying, hey, I'm not going to have as many cattle going in on this processing date. Like, do you need this processing date? They're saying, oh, so-and-so is opening some new. They're having a chance to share information and to really collaborate in a way that they wouldn't if they were all siloed businesses that weren't integrating with one another. And I hope that in the future we can do more like actual fun stuff together in a group, like a dinner maybe, rather than just coming together to work.
Sure.
I think it's super valuable.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both for really good, thoughtful answers. And I think we got most of the questions, and we still have one just came in, which we're not going to have time for, but I think we got most of the questions addressed. And thank you very much. I learned a lot of updates on what's happening in Montana from this.